Welcome back, members. The committee will come to order. We have in front of us today Senate File 2046. Senator Xiong, to your bill.
Thank you, Chair and members. I have Senate File 2046. First, I would like to thank the Minnesota Automobile Dealers Association for working collaboratively with us on this bill. I have a DE amendment, A1 amendment, sorry.
Senator Xiong offers the A1 as an author's amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Amendment is adopted. To your bill.
All right. The A1 does two things. It provides for disclosure to car buyers that the vehicle they have purchased has what it's called a kill switch, and it expands the number of vehicles that are required to have warranty. Some dealers who finance the purchase of vehicles install GPS starter interrupter devices or the kill switches. These devices allow the dealer to disable a vehicle remotely. Often a buyer is unaware that these kill switches have been installed, and you can imagine driver surprise when the car suddenly is disabled by someone at a different location flipping a switch. And so Senate File 2046 would require the dealer to tell the buyer that the car has one of these devices. And the second part of the bill increases consumer protection regarding warranties under current Minnesota law. There is no requirement that cars sold that have more than 75,000 miles have warranties at all. And so Senate File 2046 would require dealers who exclusively sell used cars warrant that the high mileage cars they sell are fit for the use for which they intended, and it provides a basic warranty for a limited period of time for these vehicles. And with that, I'll hand it off to the testifiers.
Thank you, Senator Xiong. Mr. Elwood, welcome back to the committee. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Ron Elwood with Legal Aid. I just want to thank Senator Xiong for authoring this bill, and the Minnesota Automobile Dealers Association and Ms. Bacchus for working so closely with us to get to where we are today to increase consumer protection in this area. I can just say that Legal Aid and some of the attorneys, private attorneys we work with, have seen situations where folks are harmed because of the lack of warranties, and this will increase safety and protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Elwood. And Ms. Backhouse, please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name's Amber Bacchus. I'm with the Minnesota Automobile Dealers Association here on behalf of its 350 franchise new car dealers. And we do appreciate the opportunity to be here to support this bill as amended. We are grateful that Mr. Elwood and the advocates reached out to us ahead of time to find a solution to address specific problems without disrupting the overall motor vehicle marketplace. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Members of the committee. Senator Xiong, we always appreciate that you work with all parties and bring amicable bills to the table here. And with that, those questions on the motion of Senator, Senator Dames.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Xiong. Can you tell me how you come up with mileage versus value? My concern is that there's a lot of used vehicles that are pretty low, that somebody wants to get them off the lot. Probably going to sell them at a pretty low price. And yet, if we're going to require this type of warranty, what's very likely going to happen is those cars still have some usable life and end up in the scrapyard because they're not going to put this kind of warranty on them. So I'm just wondering how you come about using the mileage as the character that would decide what type of warranty should be put on versus the value. I mean, if you have a car that you're going to buy for $300-$400 and you're going to put this warranty on it, that car is going to go off the market. It's just going to get scrapped. And yet there are some of those vehicles that are mechanically good, but body-wise, whatever, they've probably got some dents and some dings and some hail damage. So I think that what we're really doing again is we're going to make it a little just that much tougher for lower income folks to buy vehicles. If they, if you want to, I think we need to have a dollar value somewhere in this equation to help that problem.
Mr. Elwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Dames. I have two responses to that. First of all, if you look at lines 2.15 and then the new language from 2.20 to 2.20 to 2.22, it's in the same vein. So these are all about warranties that have to do with miles, and so this is just being consistent. And the second response I would have is the warranty, as you can see, is pretty modest, 15 days or 500 miles. So it's really just one of those kinds of things, and we've seen situations where, you know, you drive the car off the lot and the axle falls off, or somebody gets wrapped around a tree because, you know, the car was really not in any shape right off the lot. So that's kind of what this is getting to, and I hope that responds to your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, follow-up. And that's, I see where you're coming from. I disagree with your philosophy. I think markets are taking cars out of the market that are going to force some people not to have a vehicle. And sometimes you buy a vehicle for a couple $100, you understand if it has some problems, but we'll leave that at that. I do have another question. If you buy a car from a new auto dealer, an auto dealer that sells new vehicles, they do not comply with this, is that correct?
Senator Xiong.
Thank you, Chair, and Senator Dames, no, it wouldn't apply.
So what happens if I buy a used car from a new car dealer and I get a half a block down the street and the engine goes up?
Senator Xiong or Mr. Elwood.
Senator Dames, I think there are other rules and regulations that would apply to something like that, and I'd let Mr. Elwood expand on that. If it's okay with you, Senator.
Sorry, Mr. Elwood.
Mr. Chair and Senator Dames, I think where we don't see the problems in those situations. I think those dealers have reputations to uphold, and those are not the situations where we're seeing this. This was really aimed at the used car dealers, you know, basically the lower-end used car dealers where I think that's where we see the most problems. So we try to be always laser-focused and not try to be over-inclusive. And I think that's some of the things that we worked out with the Minnesota Auto Dealers Association. And I don't want to put Ms. Bacchus on the spot, but if she wants to respond, I'm happy to
Ms. Bacchus.
defer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Dames. Yes, oftentimes when our dealers get a trade-in, they will spend a couple grand to recondition it and make sure it's in good shape to put back in the marketplace. There was concerns with this additional warranty on them that they would not go through that process and then take these vehicles out of the marketplace altogether. So we thought it would be better for us to be excluded so we can take the time to recondition the vehicles to put them out there safely for consumers. And on top of that, we didn't want to have consumers with trade-ins be devalued either, just because they wouldn't have an outlet to sell to a new car franchise dealer.
Senator Dames?
Thank you.
You're all set, all right. Any other, Senator Duckworth, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. I see in the bill, there's a couple areas where a kill switch is referenced. 1.17, it's either struck out of the bill, and in other areas it's added. Can somebody just tell me what is the bill trying to do in relation to a fuel ignition or kill switch in cars in the instance of this bill? Thank you.
Ms. Bacchus.
Certainly, Mr. Chair and Senator Duckworth. So this would say that if you are a dealer and you install a kill switch on a motor vehicle, you would have to disclose that to a consumer who is purchasing the vehicle from you and using financing to do so.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, so the question is on the motion. Oh, did you have closing comments, Senator Xiong?
Oh, I would just like to thank both parties for being patient and working together to get a deal done here.
Great. So the motion is Senator Frentz that the Senate File 2046 is amended be 2046, right? 2046 be recommended to pass and sent to the Senate floor. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. No. The motion prevails. Thank you, Senator Xiong. Gustafson's here. Senator Seeberger. Senator Seeberger, Senate File 776 is before the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I am here with a bill that is part of the battle against PFAS in this state. This bill would work toward eliminating firefighting foam that contains PFAS. PFAS is found in firefighting foam used by the military, airports, and fire departments to extinguish fires caused by flammable liquids and in training exercises. It's also found in firefighting personal protective equipment, which is of great concern to the firefighter community. Not only that, it can be found in everyday products. The use of this foam has been linked to significant soil, groundwater, and drinking water contamination across the country. And the U.S. Defense Department has estimated that it will cost more than $3 billion to clean up just the military sites where the foam was used. Consumers and people of Minnesota deserve this action to prevent any more PFAS contaminating their water. And we as legislators have to take a stance to protect our people and our first responders. I think some of you know, maybe you don't, I'm on my local fire department. We do use foam. As I sit here, I don't even know if it has PFAS in it. But I do know that there's PFAS foam and foam that does not contain PFAS. It's out there. I know the entire country of Australia has banned it, and they've found a way to fight their fires without PFAS foam. I think we here in Minnesota can do the same. In fact, as I understand it, the Australian government or the people in Australia have reached out and said, we will help you. They have found a way to not only not use it, but to clean out all their systems and their supplies so that it doesn't contain any residual PFAS. As you know, I come from a district that is highly contaminated with PFAS. I'm in District 41. It includes the cities of Lake Elmo, Afton, Cottage Grove, and Hastings. My own well is contaminated with the plume that has traveled from Woodbury underground in the aquifers, and now we have massive filters in our basement to filter the PFAS out of our water. This is a personal issue to me. It's something that I am very passionate about, and keeping any more of this stuff out of our environment is my main concern. I do have, in the interim between the time it was heard in the last committee and here, the stakeholders have continued to negotiate, and I have 2 amendments actually to the bill, which clean up the language a little bit, represent an agreement made among the stakeholders. I have the A6 and the A7, and I can speak to each of those. I believe you should have them.
Senator Seeberger, they're just being distributed now. Let's
Okay.
start with the A6, unless you want to handle them jointly, but the A6 is before us.
Sure.
So Senator Seeberger moves the A6 amendment.
As to the A6, so the concern with the airport is, they have all this foam, and they are regulated by the FAA with regard to what they must use. And so they were concerned that they'd be put in a position where they would be left without a viable firefighting foam product that's approved by the FAA. So what the A6 does is it represents an agreement that we've reached with MAC and other airports to give them a little bit of wiggle room to allow them time to go through that approval process and then use a foam that's approved by the FAA.
I know that we have 2 scheduled testifiers. Is there any testifier that wants to speak specifically to the amendment? Any comments or questions from the committee on the amendment? The A6 is before us. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? A6 is adopted. Senator Seeberger moves the A7 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As to the A7, in the wonderful process of drafting, redrafting, amending, and coming up with language, at one point, language was drafted such that it did not prohibit the use of PFAS foam for training. So that was sort of the whole purpose behind the bill. When we started, it kind of took on this additional life to encompass other uses of PFAS foam. So the A7 simply loops it back in that you cannot use PFAS firefighting foam for training purposes, which one shouldn't do anyway.
Members or members of the public, any comments or testimony on A7? Are there any opponents, Senator Seeberger, to the A7 amendment that you're aware of?
Any opponents? No.
Okay. Members, all those in favor of the A7, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Your bill is in the form that you want it, and we have two scheduled testifiers. Could Ms. Ivana Stark and Mr. Tony Quillis please come forward? Ms. Stark, please introduce yourself for the record.
Ivana Stark, Clean Water Action. And I actually prepared my statement for all three of the PFAS bills to save time. Does that work for the committee? Okay. So Chair Klein and members, I'm Ivana Stark, State Director of Clean Water Action. To save time, I'm going to address all three. It is possible to have a healthy, strong Minnesota economy without PFAS. I'd like to start by sharing that earlier today, the International Association of Firefighters announced that they've filed a lawsuit against the National Fire Protection Association to remove the standards they have keeping PFAS in protective gear. 11 states have put in restrictions on firefighting foam containing PFAS. Australia and Denmark have banned it, and the entire EU is considering a ban on PFAS in products. The DoD has announced a phase out for foam. Your folders contain a variety of documents countering opposition claims and showing that companies can choose to turn away from PFAS and be successful. You'll find two scientists who built their career studying PFAS. They explain why we must keep these chemicals together in one class, despite industry's desire to break them up. When industry asks to exempt the internal components from inside products, they are really saying it's okay to expose Minnesotans who work on those internal parts, like the appliance tech who wrote you, construction workers, or Mr. Rosa Hosky, who you will hear from later. PFAS and internal and external components of products end up in the same place, landfills. In Minnesota, 98 of 101 of our closed landfills are leaching toxics into the groundwater. Industry will say that California vetoed their information disclosure law. What they won't tell you is that this was not done on the merits of the law, but because of a massive budget deficit. This is not a problem Minnesota is facing. They'll claim Maine is a mess with regards to implementation, without telling you that Maine only has 2 staffers to implement it. Again, a problem we don't have. Don't be distracted by the intentional chemical fog of misdirection created by large chemical companies and their allies who fly in and declare that they can't do the things they have already done in other states. 16 states are pursuing litigation against manufacturers of PFAS. 17 state attorney generals have called on the EPA to add PFAS to the chemical of significant concern list. Insurance companies are cutting coverage and resisting PFAS-related claims by policyholders. Consumers are suing and large class action lawsuits have started. There have been more than 6,400 PFAS-related lawsuits filed in federal court between July 05 and March 22. In some cases, insurers are excluding PFAS as a whole category for coverage. The cost of cleaning up PFAS in our water is estimated to be in the billions. The cost of illness, lost lives, and the cost of not being able to eat the fish or game our tourism industry relies on is high. What is never talked about is the inherent cost of doing nothing. We can't afford to keep spending taxpayer dollars on cleaning up this mess, only to endure repeated contamination because we have not slowed down the introduction of more PFAS into our environment. The cycle is expensive and absolutely unsustainable for our financial and physical health. Minnesotans must have confidence in the products they buy, the water they drink, the places they vacation. They have to have confidence that all of these things are safe today and for the future. We urge you to support the PFAS prevention package. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stark. And Mr. Tony Quillis, please introduce yourself and proceed.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Tony Quillis, and I'm the Director of Environmental Policy at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. And I'm just going to contain my comments right now, Mr. Chairman, to Senate File 776. Mr. Chairman, as referenced in 2019, the legislature prohibited testing and trading of firefighting foam that contained PFAS. There's only one reason this foam should be used right now, and that is in emergency situations, Mr. Chairman. The current product is effective in putting out liquid fuel fires at airports, refineries, and other facilities. If you use water, it simply spreads the fire, in some cases actually accelerates the blaze. Alternatives are currently being tested right now, but they're not approved by the Department of Defense or the FAA. And there's not just one alternative being tested. There's numerous alternatives being tested, and they're being tested in various types of fuels and different types of situations and scenarios.
whether it's in snow, rain, temperature. And because of all these various alternatives that are being tested, they have to also be run through the equipment. So through hoses, through nozzles, and make sure that they maintain its purpose while it's sitting in a storage receptacle. So we're making progress, they're getting close, but unfortunately, they're not there yet. And so before the alternative, Mr. Chairman, and before we proceed, we have to make sure that the alternative is accredited and certified by either the FAA, the Department of Defense, or a neutral third party, somebody like Underwriter Laboratories, to make sure that there is an accredited alternative out there and it works. We need adequate timelines to go through to make sure, because this isn't going to be a simple switch out of a can for a can. If you think about it, there's sprinkler systems, suppression systems, all the equipment that are different at airports, which include hangars, and industrial facilities. And even within those industrial facilities, they're different sizes. They have different size terminals. They have different fuel on site. So there's going to need to be time there. Also time to train the emergency personnel for the operating procedures that they're going to have to use for this new one. But most importantly, and thank you to Senator Seeberger, and I can't remember if it was the A6 or the A7, dealt with once this alternative is found, there's going to be a demand for it. And so we need to make sure there's an adequate supply out there for folks to be able to have access to it. And then, Mr. Chairman and committee members, it's just important to have all the facilities and situations included so that first responders have the ability to respond to emergency situations. So I want to thank Senator Seeberger for her openness to have the conversations her and I have had. We share the same goal. Everybody wants to get PFAS-free firefighting foam. But in the meantime, we have to make sure that our first responders are able to address emergency situations, Mr. Chairman. And so we'll keep working with Senator Seeberger, with the advocates, as well as with the firefighters, who we've had some good conversations with, Mr. Chairman, to address and try and move forward our concerns as we go through the process. And one last thing, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to address, we've talked about it a couple times, about Australia and their dealing and how they regulate firefighting foam. They do, they have what I'll call providences or states, and 7 of them do ban it in training and testing. They do not ban it at airports, oil refineries, or chemical plants. And one of the providences or states does, but they have exemptions for catastrophic incidents. So we make sure that we take care of, that we can take care of emergency situations, Mr. Chairman. So with that, I thank you for the time and the ability to comment on Senate File 776.
Thank you, Mr. Quillis. We appreciate it. No, any other testifiers from the public? And member questions or comments? Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for the bill author. Senator Seeberger, could you talk about, are you willing to make a change in your bill to address potential emergency situations, whether it's at an oil refinery where they need to get the fire out, quickly within seconds, or at an airport? Or could you talk about your thoughts about those situations? Because I think folks on this committee, when I read through some of the information we had on the incident reports of where PFAS was being used, a lot of it was being used in inappropriate situations for firefighting where there are other alternatives. But I guess I'm a little concerned around taking away tools in especially very sensitive places where maybe it currently is the only solution for those types of fires.
Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Rasmussen, yes, in fact, that's exactly what the A6 amendment did, is to provide the latitude that airports need to find a suitable replacement that meets the requirements under the federal regulations and that the FAA would agree to. We have also had conversations with representatives from oil refineries Marathon and Flint Hills on the language to allow them sufficient latitude to find a replacement that's suitable for the refineries, for the terminals, and all the things that they would need for their refineries as well. I will note, and I've also had conversations with the firefighters and getting their thoughts on the feasibility and the workability of non-PFAS foams. Those will work on petroleum fires. It's just PFAS works better. So there are alternatives out there. I think the concern that I've heard from the airports and from the refineries is they don't want to be hamstrung in the case of a catastrophic fire and not have the tools that they need. And that's certainly not the intention here. And to address, nobody puts water on a petroleum fire. It just doesn't happen if you're in a firefighting service. We use foam, we use other agents to suppress the fire. We don't use water. So the alternative to a PFAS foam is not using water. There are other foams that don't contain PFAS. I guess my point here is we've certainly been in conversations with all of the stakeholders. We don't want to hamstring anyone from being able to deal with a catastrophic situation. But on the other hand, I think we have a real interest in preventing the release of any more of this stuff into our environment in the future.
Senator Rasmussen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Seeberger. And if I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So it's my understanding the A6 amendment helped kind of address some of the concerns that the airports or the aviation players might have. Are you envisioning another amendment that would perhaps address the concerns that the refineries or other kind of heavy industrial sites might have?
Senator Seeberger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Rasmussen, if you look at page 3 of the actual bill, there is a temporary exemption for terminals and oil refineries. So that's an amendment that was offered in a prior committee. Those are discussions that we've already had. That's language that has been worked on and worked on and worked on. So yes, we have addressed some of their concerns, certainly not all of them. The conversations remain ongoing, but we've been listening and we've been doing what we can to ensure that their needs are met.
Senator Rasmussen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate that. Senator Seeberger, and I would just appreciate your work with stakeholders. I want to just encourage you to continue working with them, especially on these kind of what I would call kind of corner cases where we just need to make sure we have the best firefighting agents available to keep people safe. And I appreciate your continued dialogue with them. Thank you.
Other member questions or comments? Senator Duckworth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just would echo what Senator Rasmussen said. I appreciate your work so far to address some of those concerns with amendments, and then hopefully continuing to work toward any future improvements. You know, some things I think about are folks that already have current inventory and giving them enough time to cycle through it before they have to get the new stuff. There's always a big sigh when the chief says, switch to foam, because you know you're going to be there for a little bit longer. And when you go, whether it's inside of that structure, it's going to be extra sloppy and messy. And now the foam's going to be in the hoses and on your bunker gear, which means you're going to take it into the truck, which means you're going to take it into the station. It's going to get everywhere. So the demonstrated need for the bill it's important. And we just have to be planful and mindful about how we implement it and give enough time for everybody to cycle through what they need to, and then also allow for instances in which, hey, it's all we've got, and it's going to do the best in the case of this emergency. So appreciate you bringing the bill forward and continuing to improve it, and that's all I've got. Thanks.
Closing comments, Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, my interest is in keeping any more of this stuff out of our environment. Like I mentioned, my own well is contaminated. The entire lake of Lake Elmo is contaminated. You can't eat the fish from Lake Elmo anymore. This is a real problem, and I'm proud to be here trying to work on a solution. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Seeberger. Members, we're going to move this to the Committee on Environment, Climate, and Legacy. So the motion is Senator Seeberger's that Senate File 776 is amended. Did we amend it? As amended, be recommended to pass and referred to the Committee on Environment, Climate, and Legacy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is adopted. Thank you, Senator Seeberger. Senator Gustafson. Welcome to the committee, Senator Gustafson. Senate File 450 is in front of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for letting me present Senate File 450. Senate File 450 takes crucial and practical steps to ensure that we have an accurate list of what products being sold in Minnesota contain PFAS. The number of products containing PFAS goes well beyond the nonstick pans many of us are familiar with. The chemicals are now in food containers, furniture, makeup, pet products, much more. Quite frankly, these products have become an endemic in the goods that we rely on, something that would shock and outrage many Minnesota consumers if they knew. We are already suffering from the toxic contamination that PFAS has inflicted on our soil, water, bodies. I find it thoroughly unacceptable that we can continue to allow Minnesota consumers to blindly have these products pushed into our lives. Industry says that current chemical forms of PFAS are safer than previous ones, but given the history of the industry on this topic and the billion-dollar cost taxpayers are facing to fix their bad practices, we simply cannot give them the benefit of the doubt. Senate File 450 attempts to bring a minimum balance to this issue by requiring producers to provide the MPCA commissioner and a list of products sold in Minnesota that have intentionally added PFAS. That reporting includes straightforward data the company should have readily available, such as with PFAS does in this product, how much there is, who the contact person is for the manufacturer. Given the complexity of standard chemical labeling requirements these companies already have, they should have no problem reporting the simple requirements of SF 450. However, the amount of pushback we've seen and already seen to the common sense reporting is alarming and a clear indicator that we cannot trust PFAS industry to act in the state's best interest. There's absolutely no doubt that our Minnesota communities face significant health consequences from the toxic buildup of PFAS chemicals in our environment. We are just beginning to see the massive human cost these chemicals will be inflicting for some time to come. Minnesotans are outraged that this was done to them, and they demand accountability. They deserve to be able to make sure their dollars aren't inadvertently going to products that will further this calamity. Senate File 450 takes an important step towards ensuring that Minnesota citizens have a say in whether or not we continue to rely on these products. I urge you to support this bill and empower our citizens, and I will turn to my testifier to answer questions. With your permission, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Gustafson. And Ms. Stark, your testimony from the previous bill stands?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
You're good to go. Then in that case, I'll call forward Mr. Jeff Munter.
Beg your pardon, folks.
No problem at all, Mr. Munter. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Good afternoon, Chair Klein and members of the Commerce Committee. My name is Jeff Munter, and I've come to emphasize today the importance of passing the bills that have been brought before you today. Now, normally when I'm up here with my good friend Amara Strandy, who unfortunately can't be with us today, but she has submitted written testimony for you to look over for your consideration. For me, when people tell the story of Amara Strandy, it's always with an empathetic sense of heartbreak and condolence. It's impossible to hear about a sophomore in high school being diagnosed with a rare and painful form of cancer and not think, wow, that's really depressing. For me, I've witnessed a young and bright soul endure pain beyond the breaking point of most human beings, and it almost always somehow manages to go from bad to worse. I've had to accept some dark truths about my friend's mortality, and friends, I'm not excited for the day that I know that is coming. These are the consequences of forever chemicals, and I stand in opposition to people who view it as the cost of doing business. I have no doubt people who are against these bills share my feelings of heartbreak, and some have even expressed their intention to move away from these chemicals, but they would still look members of this committee in the eye and say, we object. I could never bring myself to object to these bills, so allow me to use this time to address those who would directly. Have you tried to imagine one of your loved ones stricken with preventable diseases for which there was no cure? Can you try to imagine one of your children living in excruciating pain? Could anything have prepared you for your brother or sister being robbed of their childhood? If it was one of your aunts or uncles, one of your cousins, one of your parents, one of your grandparents, one of your friends or your neighbors, your partner or your spouse,
would you look me in the eye and say you would have no objections to the supposed cost of doing business? As someone who's lived their entire life in Minnesota, I can confidently say that we never fall short of looking out for each other. Opening doors for people we don't even know and helping our neighbors when they're in need is our way of life. Today, my fellow Minnesota neighbors, I'm here to tell you that these bills are essential to looking out for one another, not just for our loved ones, but for the loved ones of everyone who lives and thrives in this great state. I thank you all for your time and hope you consider this when you make your final decision.
Thank you, Mr. Munter. Questions or comments from the committee? Senator Xiong.
I just have a quick comment. Thank you, Ivana, and thank you, Representative Gustafson, and thank you, Mr. Munter, for bringing this bill and all these bills to tackle PFAS. I myself went to Tartan High School, the same school Mara went to. My younger brothers went to the same school as Amara's sister. I remember in 2005, we were in high school, and we got the announcement that 3M, there was chemicals, the PFAS chemicals were in our water. It's cancerous, and I remember the fear in all the teachers' eyes, and they tried not to frighten us and not tell us about what was going on or not talk too much about it. But I was newer to the district, and I didn't understand why the Relay for Life events were so big. Like, it was the biggest school year event. And then as I got to know more kids, I realized it was so important because every year we would get the principal on the announcement before, a start of the school year or something, and let us know that so-and-so's, unfortunately, they passed away, or so-and-so, unfortunately, they have cancer, and let's all pray for them. And I grew up thinking that was just kind of the normal thing for high school, because, it was a high school. But, that's not how people are supposed to live. And so I hope we do something as a body to address PFAS, and it could have been me. I was there drinking that water. And so I appreciate you working so hard on this, and look forward to voting for this and on the Senate floor. Thank you.
Other member questions or comments? Senator Seeberger, any closing remarks?
No, I want to, that's Senator Xiong, thank you for sharing that story. I don't know that I can say anything that will add to what you said. I think that is sort of a perfect place to close out my portion of the hearing. But yeah, we need to get this out of our system, out of our water, and help as many people as we can. Thank you.
Senate File 450 will be laid over. Senator Morrison. Welcome to the Commerce Committee, Senator Morrison. Senate File 834 is in front of us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members, thank you for the opportunity to present Senate File 834, a bill to ban the use of PFAS in non-essential products in Minnesota. More than 7 years ago, 200 experts released a consensus statement raising concerns about PFAS and related chemicals. Their concerns about the impact of these so-called forever chemicals, because as we've heard many times already, they don't break down or naturally degrade in nature, were so serious that they recommended that PFAS chemicals should only be used for essential purposes. The reason for these experts' urgency was the growing body of research that has demonstrated links between PFAS and testicular and kidney cancer, preeclampsia, thyroid disease, ulcerative colitis, high cholesterol, reduced immune response, decreased fertility, low birth weight, and low IQ, among other things. These chemicals accumulate in soil, water, and the human body, and they become ubiquitous across the globe as we have poured these chemicals into our environment over the years. This is not to say that intentional harm was done, but when we've learned along the way, and as we learn, we must change our practices. The cleanup of this environmental and public health disaster will be enormous and expensive. We must start by stopping pouring these chemicals into our environment and our bodies in the first place. So this bill calls for banning non-essential use of intentionally added PFAS in such products as carpets, cleaning products, cookware, cosmetics, children's products, furniture, ski wax, menstrual products, and dental floss, beginning January 1st, 2025. Then has a 6-year period where MPCA will gather information and exempt products as appropriate. And then beginning January 1st in 2032, all non-essential products with intentionally added PFAS will be banned, except for products that have added PFAS that are deemed unavoidable use. 3M has announced its commitment to phase out its use of PFAS chemicals. Bans are being passed and proposed all over the country and the world. There is widespread recognition that we must turn away from this class of chemicals to protect water, land, and human health. Since PFAS started in Minnesota, it's appropriate that we lead in ending its use. Let's act with urgency to stop PFAS and save our water, our money, and our lives. And with that, Mr. Chair, I actually don't know if I have testifiers or if you just want to take questions. I know you've been discussing this subject for a while now.
You do have testifiers, Senator Morrison. Can I call forward Mr. Scott Rosashaki, and then Mr. Jeff Munter? I'm not sure if you had completed your testimony or if you wanted to testify again.
Happy to answer questions.
Okay, then we'll also call forward Mr. Tony Quillis. Mr. Rosashaki, please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Chair Klein and members of the committee. My name is Scott Rosachowski. I am a previous submarine nuclear electrician. I served for about 10 years in the United States Navy. I'm here to present testimony on the dangers of PFAS and its link with internal electrical systems. First, I'd like to bring to your attention 2 quotes that I believe, sorry about that, bring to your attention the importance of this legislation. First and foremost is procedures are written in blood. I bring this to your attention because we in the field of maintenance, whether it be electrical, carpentry, plumbing, or any other trade, understand that any procedures that we currently have or any safety precautions that we have are there because someone paid for it in blood. The other one, which is near and dear to my heart, is success teaches us nothing, only failure teaches. The reason I bring this up is because it comes from the father of our nuclear Navy program. He taught us that we can only learn from how we failed to impart wisdom into the future. And I think we have failed in the state of Minnesota by allowing these PFAS chemicals to exist and by not banning them. But I think we have the opportunity here. We have the opportunity to be able to protect the residents of this great state from encountering these chemicals in the future. The opponents of this bill, who are asking to exempt internal components, don't understand that people come into contact with these components, like myself, like others who do any type of maintenance or integral work. And they also gloss over the fact that these chemicals exist in landfills, and essentially out of sight, out of mind doesn't work here. So I ask, since we have the ability here to stop this dangerous chemical and to prevent further damaging our society, I would also like to state that because the federal government has yet to enact legislation doesn't mean we should stop or not protect the residents here. So finally, I ask this committee to prevent future procedures from being written in blood, to support this legislation and learn from our failures. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosashaki. And could Josh Fisher please come to the table? Mr. Quillis, please introduce yourself and proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good evening again. My name is Tony Quillis. I'm the Director of Environmental Policy at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to make some comments on Senate File 834. Short of a national standard, which I think everybody would like to see, Mr. Chairman, all stakeholders would like to see it, businesses like to ensure that there's consistency and uniformity among regulations regarding PFAS. And so we prevent a patchwork, state-by-state regulations reporting requirements and prohibitions on products. And Mr. Chairman, when we talk about PFAS, I want to make sure that we know what we're talking about here. There are over 4,000 chemicals in this class. So think of an oval circle with 4,000 sticks coming out of there, all different shapes and sizes. Not all of them are hazardous, and they come in different properties and different characteristics. Some of them never come in direct human contact. So when we do a one-size-fits-all, it just causes confusion and uncertainty in the manufacturing community. And I also wanted to talk about the breadth and the depth of what we're talking about here. There are, and I'll use the low numbers I've heard, Mr. Chairman, of between 9,000 and 12,000 uses of this product. And in such products as ATVs, boats, electric vehicles, home appliances, electronics, solar panels, wind turbines, farm implements, airplanes, and life-saving medical devices. And so businesses, especially small to medium-sized businesses, would have to check with numerous suppliers on something as small as a washer or a gasket if it's contained in their product. And think of a single product that could have as many as 100 or more components in it. Because there's no de minimis standard in this bill, simple trace is gonna trigger the reporting requirements that are in here. And when the data comes in, which is gonna be a lot of it, there is no protection in there for that assurance that that data is gonna be protected for proprietary information or confidential business information. When we talk about the definition parts of the notification, Mr. Chairman, again, just trying to be where other states have worked in these rules and regulations and product prohibitions to make sure that there's some clarity and consistency. And even between Senator Gustafson's bill that you just heard and Senator Morrison's bill, the definitions of intentionally added are different. The definitions of PFAS itself are different. So just trying to make sure that those are consistent so that we know what we're looking at as we go through and talk about specifically in the product prohibition area. In regards to the reporting requirements that would be required in this bill, Maine has been referenced a couple of times, and they're the only one that's started to try and go through it. No other state has tried the reporting requirement route, Mr. Chairman. And in Maine, on January 1st of this year, when they were supposed to start, they gave out 2,000 exemptions to businesses. They were running into global supply chain issues. It's a very complex supply chain, and when they went through to other countries to try and go through, other countries were invoking confidentiality agreements to try and find that washer or that gasket that I referenced earlier. There are, of the 9,000 to 12,000 I talked about uses of this, there's not testing protocols for all of those uses. And so the ones that do have testing protocols for it, there's worry about that the labs are gonna be able to have the capacity to address them. And so I think maybe in terms of reporting requirements, Mr. Chairman, the Interstate Chemical Clearinghouse, known as the ICC, which Minnesota is a member of, is trying to put together a reporting portal. And so I think that might be a good way, as I work with Senator Morrison and advocates, to see if we can utilize that Interstate Chemical Clearinghouse. In regards to the product bans, the kind of the second part of the bill, if you will, Mr. Chairman, when we go through, again, trying to just seek some clarity and consistency, no other state has banned cookware. California and Colorado have labeling requirements. There's no definition in the bill, Mr. Chairman, for menstrual products or for dental floss. Just trying to get that consistency and clarity as we work through those prohibition parts of the bill. So, Mr. Chairman, I just, again, want to stress the consistency and clarity going through there, and that the one-size-fits-all is a difficult way to approach this, Mr. Chairman. So thank you for the ability to make time to comment on Senate File 834, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Quillis, and could Mr. Marcus Branstad please come to the table? Mr. Josh Fisher, please introduce yourself and proceed.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Josh Fisher. I am here on behalf of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. We are a trade association representing vehicle manufacturers, automated vehicle developers, EV battery producers, and other automotive suppliers. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share our concerns and perspective on Senate File 834, which will prove challenging for automakers and includes the potential prohibition on new vehicle sales in Minnesota without further clarity to the language of the bill. So there's no doubt that PFAS are found throughout automobiles, playing critical durability, flammability, safety, and environmental roles. They're utilized in existing gas-powered vehicles and newer fuel cells and electric vehicle batteries as well, which help maintain safety while using higher voltages in the electric vehicles. The PFAS family of chemicals has helped provide this resiliency through the application of coatings and products that resist heat, oil, grease, and water. Such qualities are imperative throughout the vehicle for safety and performance. There are no alternatives that offer the same combination of properties for fire resistance, weather resistance, and temperature resistance in vehicles. So as a general comment, because of the complexity of regulating a broad range of chemicals, we would recommend that any legislation should start by focusing on regulating PFAS that are known to cause harm, as opposed to those that may or are unknown at the moment. We'd also recommend the full phase-out of the PFAS, phase out of PFAS from the bill. Automakers and their suppliers consider the impacts that chemicals used to build today's vehicles very seriously and are always looking for substitute compounds that can perform the same job with a lower environmental impact. However, there just are some cases where a replacement is yet to be replicated for use in vehicles. So if Minnesota is going to move forward with a phase-out, we think it's imperative that the state develop a process and criteria for obtaining critical or unavoidable use exemptions as soon as possible. It should be noted that the language in subdivision 9 with the removal of the application of section 14.125's timeline for PCA's rulemaking process is basically going to give PCA an unlimited amount of time to develop much needed implementing rules, and will mean that our members in the regulated community will languish under long-term uncertainty about how to move forward if the state does decide to move forward with a phase-out. So we would recommend that any regulations move forward much more quickly than they are proposed in the bill. And, development of a new vehicle, right? Automakers are developing a lot of new electric vehicles. The lead time is years, not months. So starting from the concept to final production, you could be 3 to 4 to 5 years. So if we're waiting 5 years just for the regulation, and then another 6 years or 5 more years until that's implemented, that's a lot of uncertainty for our members. So if you do move forward with the phase-out, which we don't recommend, we would certainly advocate for a more definitive timeline so we know what compliance is.
Thank you, Mr. Pfister. Mr. Branstad, please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Klein and members of the committee. My name is Marcus Branstad, Senior Director, State Affairs, American Chemistry Council. The American Chemistry Council represents almost 200 of the global leaders in the innovative business of chemistry. In order to avoid duplicative statements from the previous testifiers, I'm going to really limit my testimony to kind of the definition of PFAS that's in this bill. All chemistries that fall under the included definition in Senate File 834 are not created equal, and they should not all be regulated the same. For instance, a chemistry that's used in a kidney dialysis machine should not be considered the same as PFOA and PFOS, two chemistries that are that have adverse health effects, two chemistries that have just been identified by the US EPA for MCLs for drinking water for the entire country at a level of 4 parts per trillion. A chemistry that is used in solar panels should not be looped in with the same chemistries like PFOA or PFOS or the 4 other chemistries that have been assigned or the start of rulemaking has begun at US EPA for drinking water. The ACC desires to work with the authors of these bills to protect Minnesotans and the environment. We look forward to future discussions on how to avoid unintended consequences, though. Unintended consequences that would impact the Minnesota economy, energy efficiency goals, life-saving medical devices, pharmaceuticals, high-tech manufacturing, aerospace, and many, many, many others that have a home here in the state of Minnesota. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, many states have banned a lot of the product categories that are also included in this bill. There should be parity between the states. These bills have been passed recently. This language has been vetted in those states, and we feel that we should avoid a patchwork of regulations amongst the states. And we look forward to having future discussions, and thank you to the senator and to others that are willing to have those conversations. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Branstad. Member questions or comments? Senator Duckworth.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to briefly thank our earlier testifier for his service to the United States Navy and to our country.
Are there any other testifiers from the audience? You guys make room for the... Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. For the record, my name is Tom Johnson, Government Relations Director for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of the legislature's work to prevent PFAS pollution. I want to say that I've heard a lot today that PFAS chemicals, each one is different. That is true in many ways. However, one characteristic that all of PFAS share is they are very persistent, and that creates an incredible problem for our environment and public health. Continued use of PFAS in industrial and commercial products results in increased loading of these chemicals to the environment and our bodies. So we feel that prevention of the pollution of these persistent chemicals is necessary to protect human health and the environment, which is the MPCA's core mission. These bills, and in particular, Senate File 834, will help turn off the tap of PFAS flowing into our businesses, homes, waste management facilities, and ultimately our environment. In 2021, the state of Minnesota published our PFAS blueprint. The PFAS blueprint is a document that lays out a path for responding to PFAS contamination in our state. It outlines a tiered response plan with a three-step hierarchy: prevent, manage, and clean up. There's very good reason why prevention is at the highest priority for the PFAS blueprint. Managing and cleaning up PFAS pollution is incredibly expensive. When PFAS-containing materials end up in waste management facilities like landfills or wastewater treatment plants, removing the PFAS requires cutting-edge, complex technology and multi-step processes that are often very cost-prohibitive for the businesses, counties, municipalities that operate these waste facilities. Technologies claiming to destroy PFAS are also costly, energy-intensive, and often do not fully destroy the chemicals. Cleaning up PFAS contamination in the environment can cost many millions, if not billions of dollars, and take decades to complete. We cannot afford to treat and clean our way out of the PFAS problem. I'll just address a couple things here. There's been intention on Maine. Our agency has had many staff-to-staff conversations with the state of Maine and other states that have implemented similar bills, and we stand ready to implement the bills if passed by the legislature. We're happy to continue to work with the authors. I would also like to address confidential business information. I know that's of interest to this committee. There are already statutes in place to protect confidential business information. Certainly, businesses can request that the agency protect their information. Certainly, that process already exists. 14.125 is also mentioned. That's a requirement for the length of rulemaking. I will just say it's fairly common practice to exempt this area for very large rulemakings. It's very difficult to complete a large rulemaking if you have the type of stakeholder and public engagement necessary to ensure a really robust process. So we encourage the committee and the legislature to continue to keep that requirement out so that we have the time to build out this process in a way that I think all the testifiers are hoping for. Finally, the draft drinking water regulations, I will say, will release this week. This is an urgent need. This underscores the urgent need for us to take action. Drinking water regulations from the federal government will apply not across the nation, but in Minnesota, it will mean that our drinking water facilities, communities across Minnesota will have to address PFAS at some point. It will be incredibly expensive, and if we do not stop putting these chemicals into the environment, it will be, again, in the billions for the state long-term. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, you weren't on the agenda. Which agency are you with again?
The Minnesota, excuse me.
Sir,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you. And if I understood you correctly, part of your testimony was asking for a little bit more time in regard to a portion of this bill and its implementation. Is that correct?
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, Senator Duckworth, the bill already has the exemption for 14.125, and we would just, a previous testifier had mentioned that that was something that should be removed from the bill. I was just encouraging the committee to continue with that exemption so we can have the time to create a robust process.
That's all I've got, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Are there any amendments from the committee? Senator Seeberger.
Mr. Chair, because of the importance of this issue, in consultation with Senator Morrison and Senator Gustafson, I offer the A4 amendment, which combines all three of our bills into one little mini omnibus bill.
The A4 is being distributed, and I think you've just described it, but feel free to speak to it, Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The three of us feel very strongly with regard to the issue of PFAS. You've heard testimony today from many people who have stressed just how dangerous these chemicals are. We feel that it's vital to prevent the introduction of any more of these harmful chemicals into our environment. And for that reason, we've decided to join forces and combine our three individual bills into one comprehensive bill, which is the A4.
Senator Morrison.
Mr. Chair, I consider this a friendly amendment, and I urge a yes vote.
Questions or comments from the committee? Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I don't necessarily have an issue with this, although it just gives, I would just like a little bit of time to visit this. It looks like this was prepared yesterday for the committee today. I didn't know we were going to combine them all, and I think we just took action on a couple. We amended them, and I can't remember off the top of my head where they were supposed to go or if we just laid them all over. So my question would be, does this amendment reflect the bills that we discussed earlier as they are now amended, if we amended them? And is the idea that this combined bill would then move through the same path that those bills were to move through as well? Those are the first couple of questions I have.
Senator Duckworth, I can handle the second part of that question. I'll move to Senator Seeberger for the first part. The next path for this bill, once amended, will be to state and local government and veterans. And then Senator Seeberger, if you'd reply to this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Duckworth, thank you for reminding me. I do have the A5 and A6, which will amend the A4 to include the amendments that were adopted to my bill 776, I think.
Senator Duckworth.
Mr. Chair, I'm comfortable. If there's further work to be done amending this amendment, I'll wait to see those.
Okay.
That's, my understanding is those amend the A4, or do they amend, are those amendments to this amendment?
Senator Seeberger.
Correct. The A5 and A6 amend the A4 amendment so that its terms are consistent with my bill, which is Senate File 776, which was amended earlier.
Thank you.
The amendment before us is the A4 offered by Senator Seeberger. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Amendment is adopted. Senator Seeberger offers the A5 amendment. Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The A5 amendment is consistent with the first amendment that was adopted for my bill. This is providing latitude to airports so that they can obtain firefighting foam that's approved by the FAA.
And members, we've already voted on this amendment once. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Amendment is adopted. Senator Seeberger offers the A6 amendment. Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The A6 again mirrors the amendment that was adopted earlier today, prohibiting the use of PFAS firefighting foam for training purposes.
All those in favor of the A6 say aye. Aye. Opposed? A6 is adopted. Any further member questions or comments on the bill? Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, the first two bills that we discussed earlier seemed pretty straightforward, and I really didn't have too much issue with them. And I'm not saying I have issue with the third bill that was brought before us, but based on testimony and what I read, I wanted to spend a little bit more time understanding it. I think combining all three of these into one takes two pretty non-controversial bills. And I would just say it takes two maybe simpler bills and combines them with one that's a little bit more complicated and requires maybe some more work. So I hope that if for some reason that bill doesn't clear all the hurdles, it doesn't prevent the other two from progressing now that they've been combined, although obviously they exist separately. So that's the only commentary I have, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate it.
Other member questions or comments? Senator Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, for considering all of these important bills. And with that, I hand the PFAS baton to Senator Seeberger.
Members, the question is on the motion of Senator Seeberger that Senate File 834 is amended, be recommended to pass and referred to the Committee on State and Local Government and Veterans. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. No. The motion prevails. Thank you, Senator Morrison.
Thank you,
Members,
Mr.
there's no
Chair,
further
members.
business before the committee. We are adjourned.